New reaction today from Governor Newsom after the Supreme Court ruled most of President Trump's tariffs are illegal.
Eyewitness News reporter Carlos Granda is live in the newsroom with those details. Carlos.
And President Trump says he will use a different authority to continue the tariffs. He says those tariffs brought in billions in revenue, but the court in a 6-3 decision said the president did not properly use his emergency powers. And today he called the Supreme Court's decision a disgrace.
Something just happened at the Supreme Court that has the Trump administration in full meltdown mode, and one man just stepped forward to explain exactly what it means. California Governor Gavin Newsom went on camera and delivered the most devastating breakdown of Trump's economic collapse that you are going to hear from any elected official in America right now. And he did not hold back a single word, because this is not just about tariffs. This is about a president who built his entire second-term economic identity around one weapon, one lever of power he thought nobody could take away from him, and the Supreme Court just ripped it out of his hands. Make sure you're subscribed to The John Brown Show, because what Newsom just laid out explains why Trump's entire second-term agenda is now in freefall, and why the tantrum you're watching from the White House right now is the sound of a man who has nothing left. Here is what just happened. The Supreme Court ruled against Trump's unilateral tariff authority. The emergency economic powers he claimed gave him the right to impose sweeping taxes on virtually every country on earth without congressional approval. Courts at every level had been raising red flags. Legal scholars had been screaming about the constitutional overreach. And now the highest court in the land has spoken. Trump's response? A meltdown. A public tantrum directed at his own hand-picked Supreme Court justices, the same court that has been ruling in his favor on issue after issue throughout his second term, the same justices he appointed or celebrated, now being attacked publicly because they ruled on the law instead of his loyalty. Share this video because Newsom's response to that tantrum tells you everything about where this presidency actually stands right now. Newsom was the first governor in the country to file a lawsuit against Trump's tariff authority, months ago, before most politicians were willing to say the words out loud. He filed that challenge arguing Trump had illegally exercised emergency economic powers that no president has the unilateral authority to use. He stood in the middle of California farmland to make that announcement because the people getting crushed first by these tariffs were ranchers, farmers, and small business owners. Real people, not abstractions in a policy debate. And when the Supreme Court ruling came down, Newsom said the complaint his team filed back then reads almost identically to what the court's majority opinion ultimately concluded. He was right. The courts caught up to what California was already arguing months earlier. Think about what Trump claimed these tariffs were for: economic security, trade fairness, protecting American workers. That was the public justification. But Newsom went somewhere else entirely when explaining what these tariffs were actually connected to. Make sure you're subscribed because this is where the analysis gets significantly more damning. Newsom drew a direct line between Trump's tariff decisions and Trump's personal business dealings overseas: Vietnam, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia. In each case, trade policy shifted in ways that happened to coincide with business arrangements involving Trump properties, golf courses, and favorable regulatory treatment for Trump-connected ventures. The tariffs were not just economic policy. They were leverage, a negotiating tool that could be turned on or off depending on what was happening in Trump's personal financial world. That is not trade policy. That is the definition of crony capitalism operating at a global scale. And the Supreme Court just stripped that tool away. Share this video because what Newsom said about Trump's broader economic collapse puts this ruling in the context it deserves. The GDP numbers that just came out tell the story plainly. Growth down significantly from where it was under the previous administration. Manufacturing job losses mounting. The economic case that Trump and his Treasury Secretary built their entire second-term narrative around is not just weakening, it is collapsing in real time. And the tariff authority was supposed to be the mechanism that forced other countries to negotiate on Trump's terms, bringing back jobs and investment that would justify all the economic pain being inflicted on American families. That justification is now gone. The authority is gone. And the average American family has already absorbed over $1,700 in additional costs from these policies according to Newsom. That money does not come back automatically when a court ruling lands. The damage already done to working families does not disappear because a Supreme Court opinion gets filed. Make sure you're subscribed, because what Newsom said about the international picture adds another devastating layer to this story. Newsom has spent recent months meeting personally with world leaders, the Chancellor of Germany, the Prime Minister of Spain, ambassadors from across the globe. What he encountered at Davos early in the year was troubling. Too many world leaders bending, too many American institutions capitulating, law firms, universities, corporate executives assembled in Switzerland treating Trump's demands as the new normal to be accommodated rather than resisted. But something shifted. Bond markets spoke. World leaders began pushing back more forcefully. Democratic leaders started showing up at conferences. Trump tried to dominate exclusively with his own messaging. And when other leaders began asserting themselves, Newsom noticed something revealing about Trump's actual strength. When people push back, he retreats. When leaders assert themselves clearly, Trump backs down. The entire image of overwhelming presidential power depends entirely on the other side not fighting. The people of Minneapolis demonstrated that. Democratic governors demonstrated that. And now the Supreme Court demonstrated that. Share this video, because Newsom's diagnosis of where Trump's presidency actually stands right now is something every American needs to hear before the midterms. Think about what Trump has left. The tariff authority just got stripped by the Supreme Court. His mass deportation agenda is being challenged in courts and running into resistance at the community level across the country. His economic promises to working Americans are producing the opposite results from what was advertised. His relationships with traditional American allies are damaged in ways that will take years to repair. And the congressional majorities he needs to protect his agenda are facing voters in 9 months who are living with the economic consequences of his decisions. Newsom called it plainly. This is a president whose formal authority is shrinking in direct proportion to how aggressively he tries to use it. Every overreach produces a court ruling. Every unconstitutional power grab produces a legal defeat. Every tantrum directed at judges and justices produces more evidence that the man in the Oval Office is not operating from a position of strength. He is operating from desperation. A wrecking ball presidency. That was the phrase Newsom used. Not a transformational presidency, not a strong presidency, a wrecking ball, something that destroys indiscriminately without building anything in its place. Make sure you're subscribed, because what comes next is the part of this story that should concern every American regardless of political affiliation. Trump signaled almost immediately after the Supreme Court ruling that he intends to find another way. A global flat tariff of 10% applied universally to try to accomplish through different legal framing what the court just blocked through the emergency powers route. That is not compliance with a court ruling. That is a president treating a constitutional defeat as a temporary inconvenience to be routed around rather than a legal boundary to be respected. Newsom's response to that framing was direct. The Supreme Court is the last stop. There is no appeals process above it. There is no alternative tribunal where Trump can get a better answer. The ruling means what it says, and the administration's obligation is to comply, return the collected tariff money to American businesses and families, and operate within the legal boundaries the Constitution establishes. Whether that happens is the defining question of this moment, because a president who attacks his own Supreme Court justices publicly for ruling against him is a president signaling that he views judicial authority as something that applies to his enemies and not to himself. Think about the broader pattern Newsom identified across this entire presidency. Emergency declarations used to bypass Congress, funding freezes used to punish political opponents, tariffs used as personal business leverage, history erased from national monuments, each individual action framed as policy, the assembled pattern describing something else entirely, and court after court across multiple jurisdictions appointed by presidents of both parties reaching the same conclusion. You do not have this authority. The Constitution does not grant it. Congress did not delegate it. Stop. Share this video, because the midterm elections are 9 months away, and what Newsom said about that timeline matters enormously. When the Speaker of the House changes, Newsom argued, Trump's presidency as currently functioning effectively ends. Oversight begins. Investigations begin. The legislative protection that has allowed the administration to operate without meaningful accountability disappears. Every Republican sitting in a competitive congressional district has to answer for an economic record, producing job losses and costing families thousands of dollars. Has to answer for a president attacking Supreme Court justices he personally celebrated. Has to answer for constitutional overreach that courts across the country keep blocking. That is not a winning platform heading into a midterm election. And Trump knows it, which is exactly why the tantrum after this ruling was so intense, which is exactly why the threats against world leaders not to meet with American governors were so aggressive, which is exactly why the response to every legal defeat is an immediate escalation rather than a course correction. A broken man. That was Newsom's final characterization. Not a villain of unlimited power, not an unstoppable force. A broken man whose only remaining strategy is to create enough chaos that accountability cannot keep up. The Supreme Court just proved that accountability can keep up. This story is just getting started. Stay tuned.